book. This is the book that we published. It's a guide, really. It's available at the Newtown Library and also at the Queen Street gift shop. We also are having a concert coming up on April 24th, and that will be a virtual concert to benefit our group. So those are the two things I'm selling this morning, which may be a little tacky to do it right away, but otherwise I might forget. So I wanted to congratulate this group on the launch of joining the Pollinator Pathway. I think the time is absolutely right because there's so much information right now, so many articles and good lectures on pollinators and gardening. And so there's lots of buzz about pollinators right now. And fortunately, the message that's out there is not a technical one. It's one that's easy to understand and easy to relay. And that message is really important because it has implications far beyond pollinators. It feeds into a bigger picture of conservation and the way we manage our resources and the whole green revolution thing. So we're part of something bigger. If you go to the Pathway website, there's 3 action items that they're advocating, and one is planting native plants. Second is reduction of pesticides, and the third is rethinking your lawn. So I've structured my talk around those action items. However, I've included some background information just to bring everybody, just so that we're all on the same page about the importance of pollinators and their decline and why that is. And as you may know, some pollinators are specialists and some are generalists. As a person, I am a generalist. I am not a master gardener. I'm not a landscape designer. I have a background in chemistry, so I know a little bit about pesticides. But if I say something that needs correction or something that needs to be added, I hope that those items will come up in our question and answer section. So with that, I will go to our PowerPoint. You're starting a journey because you've recognized the value of pollinators and you know that they're in trouble and you've chosen to take some action. So this can be a very positive and rewarding experience. The outcomes of all this activity are really many, and they're all sort of interrelated. And of course, you're going to enjoy your native plants and the resulting increase in pollinator activity and bird activity in your yards. And one of the things that I like to say, and I don't know whether I heard somebody else say it or whether I made it up, but if you could remember that when you're creating a habitat that's safe for pollinators, you're also creating a habitat that benefits other wildlife species, water resources, your pets, your children, and you. So it's really bigger than just the pollinators. And if you have family members or friends that kind of don't get it, you know, why are you doing this? You can just recite this to them, that you're benefiting all these other things. So who are our pollinators in Connecticut? They include bees, butterflies, moths, hummingbirds, beetles, wasps, and flies. And also remember that that includes the different life stages, particularly of the butterflies and moths. So we have caterpillars and chrysalises and things like that. And you probably know there's basically 2 different types of bees. We have honeybees, and they are not native to the United States, but they were brought here from Europe to pollinate the crops and to produce the honey. And they live in hives, so they're managed, so someone is taking care of them. We also have native bees. There's, I think, 350 species of native bees in Connecticut, and they're wild and they live in various size communities, such as bumblebees, mason bees, and carpenter bees. They also do a large percentage of the pollination that goes on. And bees are sort of like little dust mops. They're hairy and they're designed to pick up pollen. Problem is, while they're doing that, they may pick up some chemicals that might be around. When I talk about pollination, we need to understand what it is because it's necessary for the production of future generations. So the pollen is produced in a flower, The bee comes along, the pollen sticks to the body of the bee or whatever insect it is, and then it goes to another flower where the pollen is transferred to the stigma. And this results in some kind of seed production. So it could be a seed, it could be a vegetable, a fruit, a nut, whatever it is, but it allows for the reproduction of future generations. So how did this all come about? It turns out that flowers are pretty creative and clever. They have evolved strategies to attract pollinators to come to them because they can't move around. And the things that we like about flowers, like the bright colors and the pretty shapes and the aromas, are things that they have developed to attract pollinators. You might say it's sex appeal. And we have a book here, it's called Sex in the Garden. So if you want to know more about that, we can link to that book. Some plants have evolved to attract specific pollinators because of the shape that they have or the size that they have, so that there's a fit between the pollinator and the flower. And it's beneficial to both the pollinator and the flower. You might say it's a love story. And poet Khalil Gibran wrote, "To the bee, a flower is a fountain of life, and to the flower, a bee is a messenger of love." So it's mutually beneficial, and after all, it is springtime, so this is what's going on. Pollination is necessary for 80% of plant life. I shouldn't have said insect pollination is necessary. Actually, pollination is necessary for 100% of plant life. The other 20% of plants are wind pollinated. I used to think that pollen was pollen, but of course it isn't. It comes in different sizes. So pollen that is very small can be dispersed on the wind. So pollination provides habitats for many other species as well as food for humans. And bees are a keystone species. So what does keystone species mean? Well, keystone is a word that's used in architecture. And if you look at the arch there, you'll see the big keystone up in the center. And if that keystone were to be removed, the arch would be at risk of tumbling, falling apart. So the little icon of the bee says, "If we die, we're taking you with us." People have suggested that we should have t-shirts made up with this on it. I'm not sure we'll do that, but it's kind of cute. Way back in 2016, there was a report from the UN, and it said bees, butterflies, and other pollinators face extinction. Many species of wild bees, butterflies, and other pollinators are shrinking toward extinction, and the world needs to do something about it before our food supply suffers. And it's probably not just our food supply, it's all the other habitats that the pollinators support. So it's kind of like everything. But the interesting thing that this was, what is this now, 5 years ago, and the situation hasn't really improved in terms of our pollinators. And there's a decline of not only pollinators, but all insects are on a decline, which is very concerning. A recent study finds that 40% of insect species could become extinct in the next few decades. We really need to appreciate insects more. They're the basis of the whole food web for other insects and birds and mammals, and it just goes on. We need those insects. I'm old enough to remember driving around in the summertime when your car would just get splattered with insects on the windshield, and once a week at least you would have to go, or somebody in your family would have to go and clean the windshield. That isn't really a problem anymore, and that's kind of too bad. The outfall of this decline is could have extreme environmental impacts. And if you think of the birds feeding their baby birds and how many caterpillars and insects they bring to the baby birds and what all that entails, you can see that bird populations may be at risk as well. So why are they declining? It's a multifaceted problem and with many factors, but probably the two biggest are habitat loss and fragmentation, which are related. They're not exactly the same, but they're similar, and also pesticide exposure. Pollinator habitats are shrinking. Of course, you can see from the picture, we're all familiar with what's happening in terms of commercial and residential developments on beautiful formerly agricultural lands, which feature meadows and fields and of course, forested areas as well. A lot of that is gone. Another aspect or another problem is that invasive species have crowded out healthy habitats. And this is something that is getting worse because in Connecticut, at least, we see more and more of the invasive species along the roadsides. And when you go for a walk, you'll find them in the woods. And homeowners continue to support non-sustainable practices like lawns and non-native plantings. And we'll talk more about that. So I did mention invasives. This is a picture that I took at the end of my street. These used to be viable trees, and they've been decimated by bittersweet, which they've just choked out the trees. They're goners. They're going to be dead. That whole field was where Andy Cedar used to have his cows, and once he didn't have the cows anymore, the fields have just degenerated. Now there's mudwort in all those fields. So it's sad to see, but it's something that that we deal with. We have to deal with. Invasives have a competitive advantage. Many of them leaf out early in the season. You'll see it now with when things green up. If anything that's green right now that you see probably is invasive because the native plants aren't ready to burst forth yet. So we need to learn to identify invasives and reduce them. We probably need more speakers about invasives. It's not a glamorous subject, but it's something that's very important for us to know about. So fragmentation refers to the increased distances that pollinators have to travel between their habitats. And of course, the farther they have to go, the harder it is for them to find food, nesting sites, and mates. Now, honeybees will travel up to 4 miles in search of nectar and pollen. Some of them, I've heard, even 6 miles. So they're well adapted and equipped to do those long distance foraging efforts. Native bees have much smaller ranges. Now, of course, there's 350 native bees, so there's a lot of variety in there. There's big ones like the bumblebees and smaller ones that are very tiny, that are very specific to certain plants. But you can understand that if their ranges are small, they need to have habitats that are close enough so that they can go back and forth. So nesting sites and overwintering sites are at risk. 70% of native bees make their homes underground in holes, leaf litter, or other ground areas. And some overwinter in the hollow stems or other plant parts. And I think this is really important at this time of the year because when it gets warm, I know we all want to go out there and we want to pick up the limbs off the lawn, but we also want to clean up our garden areas. And if you can really refrain from doing that, because there are probably insect homes, there's probably bee nesting sites, the stalks of the stems of the flowers that you had last summer are places where insects make their homes. So there's really no good way around this. We have to clean up at some point, but the longer you can put it off, the better. If you can just, as far as the stems that are sticking up, if you can leave 12 inches and then, do as little disturbing as you can. Don't, let's not rake things up and dig things up until it gets much warmer. And please say no to leaf blowers. They disturb the soil. So anything living in the soil is going to get disturbed. It's just not good to do that, aside from the noise and the air pollution that they generate. So an ecosystem is a biological community of organisms, and we have a nice kind of a wild ecosystem here. You can see there's a deer and there's a bird, and all these things have co-evolved through time to kind of to support each other. You have a fish, you've got a turtle maybe, and a dragonfly. And there's also things in there that you can't see, like the macroinvertebrates in the water and the soil bacteria and things that are essential to proper functioning of a system. So we have to be aware of those things as well. And the point is that these things are all connected through the food web and other processes. So if you can think of your yard may not be really an ecosystem, but let's think of it as that for the moment. Think of the things in your yard. You've got trees and you've got grass. You may have some shrubbery. You probably don't have a lot of flowers yet. Maybe some crocus are up, but it's all there and it's all working together. And I want you to think of the things that you can't see, though, the soil bacteria, the little tiny insects that are food for the bigger insects, that are food for the bees, all those things that are there to support each other, and know that they're connected, they're all essential, and we need to take care of all of that. It's hard to remember to take care of the things that we don't see, but that's why it would be good to think of it a little differently. Parts of a system work together. Everything is connected. And here we have the big hammer pesticides. And if you use a big hammer pesticide, you're apt to influence or degrade other things in your ecosystem. So whatever we do in our yard, choose your options carefully. If you're planting plants, hopefully they're plants that are beneficial to the environment. And we've already said that native plants support native insect populations. That's very important. And the other part of that is that pollinators do not benefit from plant species imported from other places, alien species. And you have a bee there and she's looking for it. She's got her little bucket ready and she's ready for that good pollen. And she may find some pollen. It may not be very nutritious. It's probably not that good for her. She's really looking for something better. So what we're going to do is plant native plants. I think that one got in there twice. Okay, and you all know Doug Ptolemy, I hope. He's our guru of pollination and pollinators. He has said that we are replacing native plants with alien species at an alarming rate, especially in the suburban garden on which our wildlife increasingly depends. And he says a plant that has fed nothing has not done its job. Well, he's not talking about feeding your plants to the deer. I mean, that's a whole other thing. But he's talking about feeding your plants to those little insects that may chew on a leaf, and then that little insect gets eaten by another insect, and that goes on and eventually goes to your birds and things that you value in your yard. So everything has a purpose, and our plants, if they're native plants, are best suited for our ecosystem. So we should start thinking of our flower gardens as a resource for wildlife, not just for the enjoyment of pretty flowers. And it is a paradigm shift. I think we all started out gardening wanting to plant something that was pretty, something that we would enjoy seeing. We wanted certain colors, or we wanted certain aromas. And I think we have to start thinking a little bit differently about what our garden does for the rest of the world. What are those plants doing to support the things that we value in our environment and in your neighbor's yard? You don't want to spray pesticides that are going to drift into your neighbor's yard. You want to plant plants that are going to attract the kind of wildlife that you and your neighbor would like to see. So now we come to native plants, which is the fun part of the talk. We all love them. They're easy to plant, and they come up year after year. And they offer many benefits. They have that high-quality pollen needed by local insect and bird populations. So again, not all pollen is equal, and the native plants have the best pollen It's the difference between having a good meal and going to, I shouldn't say McDonald's, but junk food. Some of the plants that are not natives have pollen that the bees will take, but it's not all that good for them. Natives are easier to maintain. That makes sense because they grew up here, they evolved here. They're suited for our soils, and they actually grow better sometimes on soils that aren't quite as rich and fertilized as we think we need. They usually don't require pesticides because they grew up with without needing those things. And they provide food and shelter for the wildlife. And of course, they're beautiful. Some pollinators require specific native plants. Everybody loves the monarchs, and we know that it can attract them to our yards with pretty flowers, but we also should be aware that the monarchs need a specific plant for their caterpillars. So if you've got a butterfly bush at your house, and I have several, and the monarchs certainly do come there, but I'm not doing them any favor unless I've planted some milkweed in the yard as well, which I have, for the caterpillars. And when you see a caterpillar like that one, you rejoice because you know that we're on our way to making another monarch. So you can get lists of host plants, and host plants just, by definition, they're the plants that the pollinators need to reproduce, and that's an important concept. What do I have? For black swallowtails, carrots, parsley, dill, Queen Anne's lace, tiger swallowtails, cherry, ash, willow, birch. There's whole lists of them that you can find. And trees and shrubs, we think about planting native flowers for our pollinators, but the trees and shrubs can actually provide more pollen and more nesting sites and have more benefits. So we should plant things like spice bush, willow, blueberry, cherry, oaks. Oaks are great, maple and birch. Actually, Doug Ptolemy has a new book about oaks, and that's his favorite plant because it supports 534 species of caterpillars, more than any other native tree or plant. It's something that we should all consider planting if you can. So buying native plants can be a little bit tricky. Most nurseries do not label natives. You can talk to the people at the nurseries, or you have to trust them that they know what they're talking about. They don't always. So if you go to nurseries like Earth Tones and Native, you know that anything you buy there is a native plant. And if you're looking for a specific plant, it's a good idea to know the botanical name because it gets very confusing. Many common names, many plants have common names that are in sync with their botanical name. But plants that look like wildflowers are in fact native. So there's many of those that we can buy and enjoy, things like Rudbeckia, Lobelia, Monarda. And if you like that wildflower look, like I do, then you're all set. You're ready to go. So very useful plant lists can be found at, and this is a website that you should know if you're joining the Pathway movement. It's pollinator-pathway.org. And in parentheses, it will say Northeast. And that's because it wants to differentiate itself from a pollinator pathway that exists on the West Coast. Of course, that's a very different set of plants and pollinators there, and it's a little bit different orientation. So this one in the Northeast is the one that you'll go to find all kinds of good information. My group, Protect Our Pollinators, has a website. It's propollinators.org. We also have some plant lists and all kinds of information there. You'll also find information as to how to order the book if you want to go there. And Xerces Society, of course, xerces.org, which is an awesome group, awesome organization. Now here's where natives meet pesticides. You know, the three action items of the pathway were plant natives, reduce pesticides, and rethink your lawn. So where natives meet pesticides is a bit of overlap, which we don't want. We don't want you to plant natives in your yard and then have the pollinators come and find that they've found a very toxic type of condition which either kills them or incapacitates them in some way. So the two just do not go together. I found a quote from author Margaret Renkel, and she says, drive down any lane in any suburban neighborhood, and what you are apt to see is a gorgeous blooming wasteland where the flowers feed nobody at all. And she says, between the herbicides designed to kill weeds, including early blooming wildflowers, and that would be like the clover and dandelions in your lawn, and the insecticides designed to kill anything that crawls, the typical suburban yard is actually worse than a wasteland. It's a death trap. Well, that's a dramatic visualization, but sometimes it might take that to make a point. And the point is that we need to do better. We need to do better about reducing pesticides and doing planting those plants that are good for the environment. So pesticides are defined as pesticides, herbicides, rodenticides, fungicides, anything that's designed to kill something. They're of special concern for children and pets because of their small sizes. They're endocrine disruptors for children. It's been linked to things like ADD and autism and even Parkinson's disease. So we really have to be aware that anything that we're doing like that may cause problems for the people and the things that we love. Pesticides pollute waterways from their runoff and the air through drift. And also, not just waterways, but maybe your well, if you have a well in your yard. Some of that pesticide could get down eventually and contaminate your water source. And I think we mentioned also that pesticides may actually degrade the soil by killing off beneficial soil bacteria. I think as we learn more about the soil bacteria, I think, what is it, like over 1 billion soil bacteria can be found in a teaspoonful of good garden soil. So that's bacteria that has a purpose. It's doing something good, and we don't want to kill that off. And remember that 70% of bees are ground nesters, so anything that you put on your lawn is apt to affect those bees. So this is the law of unintended consequences, and it's connected with the idea that everything is connected. And if pesticides can actually harm other organisms besides what you are trying to target them for. It can harm other plants. We've talked about the soil microorganisms, your water resources, insects in general, the beneficial insects specifically. And talking about beneficial insects, I think it's 90% of insects are either neutral or actually are beneficial. So we really need to appreciate insect populations more than we do. And of course, we don't want to impact negatively the birds and the other wildlife. So people will say to you, well, these products have been tested by laboratories and sanctioned by the government. And, you know, there's real fallacies to that. First of all, most testing is done on the active ingredient only, not the formulated product. And there's a problem with synergy, which is when you have one toxic chemical out there, it may not be the only chemical that's out there. So you may have some combinations of things. There's pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, who knows what's out there. And sometimes one will enhance the toxicity of the other. So you get a situation where 2 + 2 = 5. So it ends up being worse than it would have on its own. There's breakdown products as pesticides degrade. There's some resulting products have toxic effects. And some inactive ingredients have their own toxic characteristics. Or in the case of glyphosate, Roundup, some of those inactive ingredients actually make the glyphosate more toxic than it would have been on its own. So there's all kinds of things that we don't know about pesticides that are not being told to us, and there's reasons for that. It's big business. Anyways, Rachel Carson recognized this years ago, and she said, by their very nature, chemical controls are self-defeating, for they have been devised and applied without taking into account the complex biological systems against which they have been blindly hurled. The chemicals may have been pre-tested against a few individual species, but not against living communities. So she understood this, that you can test something in a laboratory, that's not the same thing as testing it in the real world. Why do we buy pesticides? Well, we think we need tick control, grub control, weed control, poison ivy control. And you see this little guy, he's got all these controllers. And I think this is an American mindset that we have to control everything. In nature, I think it would be much better if we thought of ourselves as part of nature and how can we work with it to make it better instead of trying to do what we want it to do. You don't have to buy pesticides. There's many alternatives. There's biological controls. We've talked about the beneficial insects a little bit. Lady beetles are just the greatest things for eating aphids. There are other beneficial insects, and you can actually buy them if you want to. They're available. You can release them in your yards. There's no guarantee that they'll stay there, but it might be fun to do, and they might do some good. There's insecticidal soap for whiteflies and aphids, and I think with any of these things we have to use a little caution, because we don't want to use those if there's butterfly caterpillars around or other beneficial insects. There's physical intervention, which would be hand picking. We mulch our gardens. We can float fabric rows over the covers, and we can weed. And then there's non-toxic substances and heat, such as corn gluten to prevent crabgrass, diatomaceous earth for control of ants. And my favorite is propane torch for control of invasives. That does a really good job, and it's kind of fun, something your husband might like to do. It's kind of a power thing. A few more thoughts. Before you go out and, just think you've got a huge problem, make sure you have a problem before you resort to a pesticide. If you see that your plant's got a few little leaves that have been eaten, you might want to just keep an eye on it. It might not get worse, and your beneficial insects may do their job. And sometimes all you need is a spray of water to discourage a critter. I used to have some pines out in front, the mugu pines, and they would get those little white worms every year. Instead of reaching for a can of something toxic, I found that if I sprayed them with water, kept an eye on them, I could reduce their numbers to the point where they weren't damaging my plant anymore. So anything that you buy, read the labels very carefully, adhere to any caution statements that are on there. That's so important. People just think that they've got something and they'll just spray it around without really knowing that they should be doing it a little more carefully. And remember that just because a little amount works well, it does not follow that a lot works better. That's true of any kind of medications or any kind of thing that we're trying to change through chemicals. So this is what we need to think about, because we see this in Connecticut. This is typical. We can drive around and see many examples of these huge lawns. Not much is growing there except turf grass. It's not really doing anything for anybody else, except maybe the owner of the house likes that. I don't know. Across the United States, there's approximately 50 million acres of managed turf. That's the size of New England. That's a huge amount of lawns. And this is 2% of the land area in the country, and makes lawns the single largest, most toxic crop in the country. Nearly 80 million pounds of pesticides are used on U.S. lawns every year. And we use a lot of water, and we use a lot of fertilizer, which doesn't help the environment. So if we just think of what we could save in terms of money, in terms of fewer pesticides, in terms of encouraging healthy ecosystems, if people could change those habits and if we could get away from those big lawns. It's big business, it's a multi-billion-dollar business, and there are market forces to promote those practices that make this lucrative business what it is. And we've been conditioned to want a flawless lawn, no matter what it costs monetarily or environmentally. And I almost think maybe we've been brainwashed, or maybe we just haven't thought about it critically recently. So I love this quote by Paul Robbins, and he says, "We don't let grass get tall enough to go to seed, but we also water and fertilize it to keep it from going dormant. We don't let it die, but we also don't let it reproduce." I mean, that's just kind of crazy if you think about it. So what we've done is we've traded a wild area, where our houses used to be, which is probably a meadow or a field or maybe a forest someplace. So we have those wonderful, naturally functioning wild areas, and we've traded them for a monoculture of grass, which is of no value to the ecosystem. And you know, it's not our fault. We all need houses, and we all need a little lawn around our houses, but I think we've gone to extremes. And what this bee is looking at our lawn, and what he sees is a desert. There's nothing there for him. There's nothing of value. Homeowners typically use 10 times the amount of pesticides and fertilizers per acre on their lawns as farmers do on crops. That's crazy. I mean, it just doesn't make sense, because we're treating our lawns as a crop, and for what? Many of these chemicals are harmful to bees and other insects, as well as pets and children. And many of these fertilizers and pesticides actually degrade the soil. And this is such a typical view here. Somebody's out doing their spring lawn maintenance work. Unfortunately, these chemicals don't stay put. They wash out with the rain, and they'll get into the stormwater and into our streams and lakes and even deep groundwater. They're also easily tracked into our homes and our car interiors. And sometimes when they are tracked into the house, they stay there for weeks. It's amazing. I particularly do not like weed and feed products. People use it because it's a one application product, so they think it's easy, it's time consuming. But if you think about your lawn, if you think it needs fertilizing, which this is not the best kind of fertilizer to use, but if you have some weeds in the lawn, maybe 5, maybe 10% of your lawn needs the herbicide, but you're putting that herbicide on 100% of your lawn, which does not make sense. So this results in using 20 to 30 times more herbicide than needed. And that granular product is something that the birds can take up, and they're at risk from these applications. And I think we mentioned it's tracked indoors, carried by wind, water resources. These products have been banned in Canada. Well, good for them. You know, I wish we could do that. And this little cartoon just makes me laugh. It's a cow, and it's eating a marijuana plant. So she's weeding and feeding. And it amuses me. So I think we all need to think about your lawn. Is it bigger than what you really need? Probably yes. I know we need lawn. You want a place for your kids and your pets to play. You need a lawn where you might entertain your friends. But think about, do you really need 1 acre or 2 acres of lawn? Probably not. Think about your lawn in terms of, is it safe for your pets and children? What's going on your lawn? Are you putting chemicals on the lawn? And if so, who is putting those chemicals down? Do you have a lawn service? Do you know what they're putting down? Be a good idea to find out. Ask some questions. Ask specific questions, because they'll tell you, oh, this product is good and it's completely safe, and get the names, look it up, do a little research. And does your lawn fit in with the lifestyle that you aspire to? Now, I assume that you're probably all looking to have a more natural lifestyle, which is the trend right now. Um, we want to do things in ways that benefit the environment and the bigger world, not just us. And then you can decide if some changes are needed. And maybe it's your husband that's doing all the lawn work and maybe doing the mowing. Maybe he's putting down the weed feed. Maybe it's time to have a talk with him. And I don't mean to harp on men or to point them out, but it seems to be something that men like to do. They like to keep the lawn, and that's fine. But I just think we need to think about our lawns differently. So there are options. Change your mowing habits. We can mow less frequently. Some towns are promoting a no mow May. So don't mow, try not to mow until the 1st of June, if you can. And the reason for that is because it's during May that all the clover blossoms come up. You may have some violets, you may have some dandelions in the lawn. If you could just keep those for the pollinators, because you've got the bumblebee queens now are coming out of the nesting site, and she's looking to establish a new nest, and she needs some pollen and nectar resources to get started. And if she can't find them, she won't survive, and there's a whole colony of bumblebees that will never get born. So we can also reduce the size of our lawn by enlarging our beds or adding some flower beds. We can let some of the lawn go unmowed. If you've got a little corner someplace, and you could experiment and just not mow it for a while and see what comes up. You might be surprised that some nice native wildflowers will come up. And you might find some nice, not so nice invasives come up. Those will need to be pulled and addressed, but at any rate, it's fun to experiment and see what happens. And we can always go organic. That's another option. So if we need to change our habits or think about that, if we should let the grass grow at least 3 inches. This allows the grass to provide a little shade for the soil. It also allows the roots to go deeper, and you'll have a healthier lawn. Leave the grass clippings. Most mowers these days do mulch, and I also found out recently that you can buy special mulching blades for your mower if you want to do that. If you can possibly leave the clippings on the lawn, that provides some nutrition for it. Encourage clover. Clover is a wonderful plant because it brings nitrogen back into the soil. The bees love the white clover flowers. And if you can tolerate some violets and dandelions, that would be great. If you can find a place where you have got some bare ground, maybe over on the side, maybe under some trees that you have where the grass doesn't grow very well, that's great for nesting sites for the bees. And leave some autumn leaves for overwintering pollinator insects. We should you can mulch the leaves that are on the lawn, and if you find that you have to rake some, put them into your flower beds, hopefully, and that will provide some coverage for your plants in the winter and a place for the pollinators to overwinter. And let's not be so neat. We don't need to go out there and clean up. We don't need to have the neatest lawn, the neatest yard in the neighborhood. That's kind of old hat. I think things are changing. I think we're getting more casual about things, and we're beginning to learn how to work with Mother Nature instead of controlling her. So it's helpful to understand that most lawns in Connecticut are seeded with cool season mixes. They may not be so great during the summer, as you found out. And the color of your grass may change during these dry spells, but you know what? That's okay. It'll green up again when the rains start. But we don't need to look like golf courses. Let the golf courses be golf courses. Let our lawns be lawns. And if you do water, if you just feel like you have to water very deeply, because otherwise it's not really going to do anything for the roots. And don't use synthetic fertilizer. This greens up the grass, but it doesn't do anything for the soil or the root system. So in terms of reducing the size of our lawn, Someone said we should think of our lawn as a pathway through our gardens, which would be great, you know, and we'd probably all like to have something that looks like this. But um, this is kind of to inspire you. We're probably not going to achieve this in the next year or two. And you might not want to because this is looks like a fair amount of work, but it's something to work towards. It's a goal. And we talked about establishing a meadow as part of the lawn. If you just let a little bit grow up, see what happens. I mean, this is awesome. Something like this is so beautiful. And it's a whole different way of thinking about what we can do with our property. And adding native plants, natives everywhere. Would be nice to have something as lovely as this. But you know, if you just add things this season when you're adding plants to your yard, add some natives. If you can get up to 30% natives, that would be great. Beyond that would be even better. And trees, again, they offer more pollen and nectar for the pollinators than the little plants will. And trees are just so special. So for those problem areas, you want to choke out weeds in your lawn. The best way is to have a nice, healthy, organic lawn. You can use pre-emergents such as corn gluten to suppress the crabgrass. You can use vinegar on the walkways for spot treatment. And there's good old physical intervention. I know DOT has a bad reputation, and because of all the trees that we've all seen been cut down along 84. However, I have to tell you that there's a branch of DOT that's been very good about cooperating with other agencies, other state agencies, and this all came about as part of the Pollinator Protection Act back in 2016. So they're cooperating with DEEP and with Connecticut Agricultural Extension Service, and they actually have modified their mowing regulations, and a median that's 60 feet or wider, they maintain a 50-foot buffer, which will be cut only once or twice a year. So all that area in between those 15-foot areas is growing wild. And it did seem like for a while that I saw a lot of that happening. I think as time went on, maybe they weren't respecting that quite so much. But a little retraining is good. And there was a pollinator Zoom meeting recently with these guys, and it was good to remind them that, yeah, that 15-foot buffer is fine. And they do need that for lines of sight for traffic, and we can give them the 15 feet as long as they leave the center part uncut. And there's actually pollinator habitats that they are establishing, and there's one right off exit 10 in Newtown. So when the vegetation gets a little higher, I'll try to take a picture of that and send that along to people because it's fun to see those places. So you're going to become part of a pollinator pathway, which is a corridor of public and private lands. Of course, they're not really connected. They're connected by pollinators that can fly to these places. And they're pesticide-free areas. How does a pollinator pathway help? Well, we talked about a lot of problems that pollinators have, and the pathway seems to address all those problems. We talked about fragmentation as a problem. The pathway helps because it connects those areas so that fragmentation isn't such a big problem. We talked about pesticides and loss of habitat, and again, the pathway encourages us not to use pesticides and to create more habitat. And we talked about the coevolution of pollinators and native plants. And again, the pathway recognizes that. And it recognizes that everything is connected. The pathway is a connection, really. It's a connection for pollinators, it's a connection for people, because you're going to meet a lot of people, a lot of organizations that will help you to spread the word, and I think it's going to be a great opportunity for you to enjoy that. So the history of the pathway in 2016, Donna Merrill, did some work, and she had the idea that there could be connected sites of native plants, and she actually distributed some plants. I think I have one still in my yard that she gave us years ago. And the idea grew in her town, Wilton, and it has now spread to over 200 towns in Connecticut, New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. And it keeps growing. This thing has just blossomed. And it's organized by volunteers from town groups through a steering committee and through their website. So, there's no dues for this. It's strictly volunteer work. It's an amazing phenomenon, really. And it has been very successful. Mary Ellen LeMay has said, the initiative as launched by Protect Our Pollinators and the Pollinator Pathway have grown astronomically in a really short time. It is truly remarkable. In my 20 years working in conservation, I have never seen anything like this. And I'm going to read to you the rest of this. This is a force with huge momentum that we should carry to Hartford with the support of our elected officials and put stronger bans in place with stricter enforcement. Nobody is putting the whole picture together like we are, and we have a clear, consistent story that resonates with people in every town we have presented. That is powerful. Let's keep the momentum going, warriors. We are the voice and the storm. so that is very motivational to me. And down in Washington, Drew Toher from Beyond Pesticides is impressed, and he said, your efforts to create a pollinator pathway are ecologically sound and incredibly important. So Donna has planted the seed for all of us. So your yard can be on the pathway. It's empowering. It gives you something to do. It gives you a little bit of control over what's going on. It lets you do something positive. And it's scalable. If all you can do is put a native plant on your deck because you have a small property, that's fine. If you can do more, that's good too. You can be creative. Certainly a lot of garden plans and the way we think about our gardens are very individualistic, so you can have the garden that you want. And it's a feel-good project, and it's really more than that. It's a philosophy. However, it might not be the philosophy of your neighbors. You may have brush piles in your yard, and you may have a lawn that doesn't get mowed every week, and you may have things that the neighbor might not understand. So we talk about this a lot, what to do about those neighbors. A little gentle education might help. I think probably providing some literature or an expert to talk to the person would be a good idea, because they may not take your arguments as seriously as they would if they read it or hear it from an expert. And then the thought was that if they have children or grandchildren, and kids are much more enlightened than many of our older folks. And so the children or the grandchildren may have more success in changing things with your neighbors. So as part of the pathway, there's something for everyone to do. You can sponsor talks, you can share information, you can do events for children, you can write articles, you can take photographs. There's something for everybody, and it's a very positive thing to do. So the things that I would like you to remember is that everything is connected, and everything includes all those little things that you don't see, but they're there. We need to plan for them. We need to remember that native plants support native insects. And the last thing that is going to be your mantra that you're going to say to people when they ask you why the heck you're doing this is that when you create safe habitat for pollinators, you are creating safe habitats for other wildlife, birds, your water resources, your pets, your children, and you. And usually when you get to pets and children, you get their attention. So having this knowledge is good, but it's even better if it actually creates some change. So I'm hoping that this information will be shared, and I'm hoping that there'll be some thought about the way we maintain our gardens and lawns, and maybe some changes. And I'll go out on a limb here, but I think that there's a revolution in gardening. I think it's coming. So let's be on the forefront of that. So enjoy your journey.
Thanks, Mary. That was fabulous. We really appreciate it. Do you have some time for questions? There were a few in the chat.
I do.
Great, great. So the first point is from our own Barbara Bradbury page. She just pointed out, for those of you who are interested in the book that Mary referred to, Earth Friendly Gardening, 1 yard at a time, the book can be purchased in Newtown at the Queen Street gift shop, or you can go to the Newtown Serenius Booth Library as well.
Correct.
And she just said, let's see what else we have. Oh, Jackie asked if you could clarify fragmentation and its relationship to the pathway.
Its relationship to what?
The pollinator pathway.
Okay. Well, you know, big parcels are being subdivided and parcels are being fragmented so that there aren't the floral. I think it more of it in terms of the bees. It makes it harder for the bees to get around. But we can't think of it in terms of the pathway, and the pathway establishes little waysides for the bees, you know, as they venture out. And I'm not sure I'm saying this right. Let's see. Fragmentation and the pathway. Well, I guess I have to think about that. But
I think too, though, Mary, I mean, part of the pathway is to decrease fragmentation, right? So if we can all get our, you know, our lawns, our properties on the pathway, we
right.
are actually encouraging, you know, an actual pathway and like a wildlife for bees corridor.
Yes, thank you, Anne. That's perfect.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. We're all here to help. And Holly pointed out that natives are beautiful as well. And thank you, Holly. And Margaret said, is there any reason for using pesticide on our yards, town properties, land trust preserves, and farms? I think you might have touched on that a little bit, but if there's anything else you'd like to add?
Well, is there any reason to do it? No, I don't know. You know, people ask about specific pesticides, and you know, we can look for alternative pesticides or better pesticides. There are. I don't know. I can't. I guess yes. For big tracts where you've got invasives, I guess I can understand using pesticides to get those invasives under control. And I guess that's the only instance I can think where I could say it's okay to use pesticides. There's too many good options. But yeah, for invasives, I would say yes.
Right, especially, and I think our focus here is on our own property, so there's much more control. Right?
Exactly.
Barbara also pointed out that Doug Tallamy's new book is The Nature of Oaks. So if anybody wants to learn more about oaks. Lorena Cipolla said, try not to mow your lawn before dandelions bloom and then wait another week because honeybees rely on the dandelions to start their honey flow. Marty Sherman wanted to hear more about success stories regarding influencing municipal public works to do different types of road sign maintenance, which I think you did touch on. She said, can the Pollinator Pathway participation give us more tools for convincing town officials to adopt pro-pollinator strategies?
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, the whole philosophy is something that we need to bring to our towns, and they're beginning to get on the bandwagon. I mean, I see it as a working together kind of thing. It's a coalition, and they should be part of it.
Jackie pointed out that the concert that you referred to is going to be a virtual concert via Facebook Live in Washington at Salem Covenant Church on Saturday, the 24th at 8 p.m. So just look for Protect Our Pollinators website on Facebook, and you'll get more information on that. Someone asked about sharing the PowerPoint. Mary, that's at your discretion. Let's see what else.
This is Estelle, and we have I have recorded the whole session, so we.
Okay, good. So we have a recording.
Mary, when you give us approval to do that.
Okay, sure.
I also wanted to. I just wanted to mention, speaking empirically about our own garden, we went pesticide free a number of years ago, and an expert, I don't remember who, that I heard speak at one point
Okay.
If you create.
In a few minutes, I'm on a Zoom.
Folks, can you please
thing right
mute
now.
if you're talking, just so we can hear Estelle and Mary, please? Thanks.
I was just starting to say that in the ensuing years, I've noticed that at this expert's advice, if you create healthy plants, they don't need the pesticides, and the whole symbiotic relationship of all the insects and birds, and we leave a lot of leaves under the trees and so forth. It all creates this wonderful system that I just enjoy watching as much as anything else. So I just wanted to point out that it actually does work, and you can watch it happen.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. That's helpful. Mary, someone asked if you knew whether rhododendrons were poisonous to bees.
Poisonous to bees? Not that I know of.
I think maybe we could do a Google search on that. Whoever E. Caney posted that. So I'm sorry, we're not quite sure about that, but let's do a Google search afterward. Lauren says, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and expertise. Great job. We're all on board with that. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
And Jill says, are all weeds bad? I've received advice that I will not be able to maintain all the weed growth. Do I need to remove them all? I guess that might depend on which weeds, right, Mary?
Yeah, and it depends on what you consider a weed. Unless the question is more specific, it's hard to answer.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to come back with more specific question, we appreciate it though. What's a good way to find out which plants are native, and if they are not native, if they're harmful to the ecosystem, asks Christine.
Well, again, there's lots of good lists on the two websites that I put up there, the Pollinator Pathway website and the Protect Our Pollinators website. There's lots of lists.
Yeah, and there's the Native Plant Trust as well. And so there, if you Google native plant and put your state in, you can usually bring up something in just a regular Google or Bing search. Deb comments, isn't a weed merely a plant growing where we don't want it?
Yeah.
Yep, sometimes, right?
So it's in the eye of the beholder.
Pat asks, regarding waiting for yard cleanup, when is it best to do a cleanup, or should I not do a cleanup at all?
Be best if you could not do a cleanup at all. That would be the natural way to do things. But I know, people are going to want to do some cleanup. So just put it off as long as you can, and maybe do parts of it. Maybe leave some. Part of your yard, just leave natural if you can. Because these insects are coming out of hibernation at all different times. I mean, they used to say once the temperature goes up to 50 degrees and it's consistently 50 degrees, it's okay. But what we found out is that may not work for all kinds of insects emerging from their overwintering habits. So just be aware that what you're doing in the leaf litter and underneath your, and in your garden areas, try to disturb it as little as possible.
There's a question, is organic fertilizer okay for vegetables?
I'm not a vegetable person, so I guess I'd have to.
I can't help there either, unfortunately. I'm sorry. Yeah, I can't chime in there, but someone asked whether if corn gluten is effective against Japanese stiltgrass. Oh,
I wish it were. I kind of doubt it. If it were, that would be great, because stiltgrass is really difficult to deal with.
Pat asks, she belongs to a garden club. How can she best influence her garden club? I'm assuming regarding natives.
Oh, I don't know. You have to spread the word. You have to talk to people. Maybe schedule a speaker at your garden club about natives. There's excellent speakers. I've seen a lot of good Zoom presentations this winter and spring. So a presentation.
There are so many virtuals. Mary posted some beautiful pictures. So you might, do your own yard with natives and just share, because they usually have a sharing portion at the end of the meetings and such. So that way you can show folks how good it looks. Victoria asks, is there any research you can refer to in terms of ticks and native plants, height of grass, or other characteristics that are built into this kind of I guess, natural gardening?
Well, ticks, yeah, there's a relationship between ticks and the barberry. So if you have any barberry in your yard, that has been documented that ticks, there's a relationship there. So any barberry should come out of your yard. First of all, it's an invasive, and it's could be impacting your health. And what was the other part of the question?
Any research you can do ticks and native plants, the height of grass, or other characteristics that are built into this kind of gardening?
Yeah, you know, sometimes the things that we need to do for ticks and the things that we need to do to have natural gardens are in conflict. I know people think that if the lawn is higher, there's going to be more ticks in there. I'm not sure about that. They may be in your garden areas. They may be in other bushes. It's just something that we live with here in Connecticut, have to be very aware of. I don't know of any studies about it other than the barberry.
Christine asks, how do we join the garden club that was mentioned earlier?
I'm sorry, what?
I don't know, Christine, if you meant the Roxbury Bridgewater Garden Club or the, Mary, did you refer to one of the garden clubs in Newtown? I don't recall.
I don't recall either.
Yeah,
Roxbury Bridgewater one. I
okay,
live in
great.
Bridgewater.
Oh, great. Yeah, so why don't you reach out to Estelle? She is the president of the Roxbury Bridgewater Garden Club, and they might have a webpage that you could go to, and I'm sure
Okay.
there's some information on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And Holly mentions Newtown Conservation Commission is working toward a native plant policy with the hope of inspiring other towns to pursue similar policies. Thanks, Holly. She mentions that some rhododendrons are native and their pollen is not poisonous. Someone mentioned the Native Plant Trust for those who are looking for native plants. Christine says, Christine's husband says, you guys are amazing. So kudos, Mary. Thank you very much, Christine's husband. Holly says the Protect Our Pollinators Garden Guide has a list of natives and they can send you that list. So go to the Protect Our Pollinators website for that. Tamara Vina says organic fertilizer, oh, and I just lost it. Oh, for veggies is compost or greater than compost. A lot of the answers to these questions, Jackie says, are in the book. So you can look at the book, you can get the book, you can go to the library and look at it. There's that as well. And I think I have been through all of the questions. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mary. We so appreciate you and giving your time today. And I know that you've been doing some great work with Protect Our Pollinators, which, folks, is a nonprofit organization. So if you want to support them, you get a tax refund on that. If you want to join the Roxbury Bridgewater Garden Club, please reach out to Estelle. We can give you her email address if you don't already have that. So just reach out to Barbara at Roxbury Land Trust and we'll connect you. Barbara, do you have any wrap-up questions or comments that you'd like to make?
Yes, I would like to just let everybody know that next week's talk is going to be given by Tati Benavenia, who is a Roxbury resident, and the title of her talk is Native Butterflies and How to Attract Them to Your Connecticut Garden. Mary did touch on this briefly in her talk about how when she specifically mentioned that monarch butterflies and the caterpillars do need specific host plants. And that's what Tati will be focusing her talk on, which is next Saturday at 11. We will send a Zoom link on Thursday for the Saturday event. So look for that on next Thursday if you're interested in coming. We certainly do want to thank Mary for her time and her knowledge. It was very informative. I know I learned a lot, and I think a lot of this is taking small steps incrementally to getting to a place where we individually can protect pollinators and preserve them and prevent them from going extinct, which we don't want to see. If there are any additional questions about joining the Roxbury Bridgewater Pollinator Pathway group, I sent you our web address as well as an email. So if you have any questions, it was at the bottom of the Zoom link. So you can look at those two sites. So if no one has any other questions, again, we'd like to thank Mary again. I see that there's a couple of thank yous in the chat. So thank you, Mary, from many people. Just a couple other. There was one that said, "Good job, Mom," that popped up.
Mary, no, that's Jackie, her daughter.
That must be my daughter.
It's good to have a good, solid fan club, and everyone is very
Oh.
appreciative. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yep. And so, Estelle, thank you, Estelle, just popped this up on the screen. I think everybody can see it. It's our the names of the different groups that are involved. There's the email down at the bottom and the web address as well. And we will try, with permission from the presenters, we'll be forwarding the recordings. They will come. We need to, as a group, we're trying to figure out if we should send them all at once, do them each week, whichever. So stay tuned on that.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? Awesome. All right. We're going to leave now.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Have a good weekend.
Yes. Take care, everybody.
Please share, everyone.
Thank you, Mary, so much. It was wonderful.
That was my pleasure.
Thank you.